Hello and welcome to another episode. And on today's show, I'm going to be taking you on a little journey of the concept some of you may know about called the Dark Night of the Soul. And what I will be doing is taking you through various different interpretations of this concept, which is something that may or possibly will affect every one of us at some point in our life. And this is a sense of deep upheaval in really your entire belief system. It could also be seen as a deep depression, but there are some very clear differences between simply a depressive episode and a dark night of the soul. I would say a dark night of the soul is more of an existential crisis where your entire meaning in life is in question. The term dark night of the soul is something that goes back a long time. And in the words of Eckhart Tolle, it's used to describe what one would call a collapse of perceived meaning in life, an eruption into your life of a deep sense of meaninglessness. The inner state in some cases is very close to what is conventionally called depression. Nothing makes sense anymore. There's no purpose to anything. And what is it that triggers this? I'll go through that. What triggered it for me, and I'm sure many will be able to relate in their own way to things that have happened in their own lives to have caused this spiritual emergency. So I'm going to be going through some definitions, talking about different interpretations, including some of the work of Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell, and other people's methods for getting through this tough period. The dark night of the soul is a phrase of passive purification of the spirit in the mystical development, as described by the 16th century Spanish mystic and poet St. John of the Cross. Now, guys, bear with me, because what I'm going to do is read the poem The Dark Night of the Soul. And then what we'll do is we'll go into more of modern meaning of this term. So, here we go. On a dark night, kindled in love with yearnings, oh happy chance, I went forth without being observed, my house being now at rest, in darkness and secure, by the secret ladder disguised, oh happy chance, in darkness and in concealment, my house being now at rest. In the happy night, in secret, when no one saw me, without light or guide, save that which burned in my heart, this light guided me, more surely than the light of noonday, to the place where he was awaiting me, a place where no one appeared. O night that guided me, O night more lovely than the dawn. O night that joined beloved with lover, lover transformed in the beloved. Upon my flowery breast, kept holy for himself alone. There he stayed sleeping, and I caressed him. And the fanning of the cedars made a breeze. The breeze blew from the turret as I parted his locks. With his gentle hand, he wounded my neck and caused all my senses to be suspended. I remained lost in oblivion. My face, I reclined on the beloved. All ceased, and I abandoned myself, leaving my cares forgotten among the lilies. So what is the difference between chronic depression and a dark night of the soul? They are two distinct experiences and they share similarities. But with a dark night of the soul is used in spiritual context to describe a period of deep spiritual desolation, disconnection, and existential doubt. It's a phase in a person's spiritual journey characterized by a profound sense of emptiness and actually the absence very often of the divine presence. So not a pleasant experience where you're feeling whole with God or source, more of a disconnection. Some of the symptoms would be feeling abandoned, forsaken by a higher power, intense spiritual or existential questioning and crisis, a deep sense of meaningless and despair. So what causes this to occur? So it's often triggered by significant spiritual or an existential event, realization, and it can really be part of a person's profound spiritual growth and development, leading to greater awareness and enlightenment. But one of the main things is that it really doesn't feel good, and it feels like one of the most painful experiences, and it can last for a very long time, maybe even years. And if we look at the work of Carl Jung, who talks about the collective unconscious and shadow work, it's very often delving into the darkness and the shadow and the repressed parts of ourselves, where we are looking for answers, where the light is actually found. Unlike chronic depression, the dark night of the soul is typically addressed through spiritual practices. So whereas if this was something of an isolated incident, you may reach for regular medical assistance. But I think just like any existential crisis, spirituality is really the way to deal with this. So support may include things like prayer, meditation, spiritual guidance and counseling, but mostly it's about finding a community and finding solace in whichever form of spirituality resonates with you. That could be the church. It could be any form of spirituality, really. You are questioning everything. You feel confused and overwhelmed, but you know that something deeper is happening within you. You might be going through a dark night of the soul. The experience happens when we wake from sleepwalking through life and we stop living on autopilot. We start to realize we've been conditioned to perform, achieve, and to seek external things to make us happy, or to feel worthy of being loved. We start to realize that what we've been told to be true about life isn't necessarily true. And one day we wake up wondering whose life we're actually living. This can create a dark night or a period in our lives when we feel depressed or lost. We might feel extremely resentful about the path that we chose for our life. This is really the beginning of waking up. And we see the reality that our culture is built around dysfunction. And we've inherited conditioned beliefs, behaviors, and generational trauma. When this happens, we might start spending a lot more time alone, questioning things. And we begin the process of learning who we really are. It's time to connect back to the truth, to face our reality, create a new one. The concept of alchemy. The dark night of the soul can feel heavy and overwhelming, but it's all part of the process we all go through. That was a section I just read there from the holistic psychologist Nicola Pera. And I really went through my own dark night of the soul in 2020. And in 2021, I wrote something which I'm just going to read out to you all now. This is actually quite funny to be reading this back, but this is from a Facebook post that I wrote in 2021, in September 2021. I just thought I'd write something to say how I'm feeling at the moment. I think a lot of you might be feeling the same. I feel like this situation has caused us to shift our perceptions of life, our reality, and what we want from the future. We thought life was going to go a certain way. Now we have to navigate a new reality. No one knows what this looks like. Spiritually, I'm detaching from all areas of life I thought I wanted. I'm losing interest in stuff, the car, the holiday, the clothes, the career. I'm not interested in any of the TV shows, the celebrities, the concerts, or hardly any of the things I thought I was interested in. For over a year now, I felt like my higher self has been telling me to detach from all areas of life in preparation for this new life, but I'm still in limbo because I don't know what that life is. So everything feels quiet and still. So much has happened since the start of this big, fat hoax. And I see memories coming up on my Facebook every day from this time last year. And everything feels old and embarrassing. I think it feels embarrassing because we're learning so much new stuff every day. And even something last year feels like a much naiver version of myself speaking. But at the same time, it feels like time is standing still and not much is happening. I feel numb a lot of the time and have trouble putting these things into words because it's complicated, trying to navigate uncharted territory like this. The constant media threats and distractions are beyond fucking boring now. I feel like just rejecting what doesn't resonate with me anymore, and that's the only solution. So that was something that I wrote in the middle of 2021, and you can tell from listening to that I was shedding layers of the past version of myself. That's what a dark night of the soul looks like. I'm going to read a section now from The Hero with 1,000 Faces, which is a book by Joseph Campbell. And he talks about the process of becoming the hero of your own journey. And in this section, which is called The Hero and the God, I'll just read from this. So I think that this really encapsulates the feeling of this dark night of the soul. The standard path of the mythological adventure of the hero is a magnification of the formula represented in the rites of passage: separation, initiation, and then return. So this is like going into the shadows to look for the answers and then coming back into the light. The hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there to be encountered. A decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. And Laura Massou talks about the collective dark night of the soul. She recently wrote that Many of us have been going through a dark night of the soul, or have been through a dark night of the soul. One might even say we're in a collective dark night of the soul. The dark night of the soul has a purpose which is often missed. It's an alchemical process that represents an immense opportunity for spiritual transformation. The dark night of the soul is often, but not always, precipitated by a crisis, a breakup, a death, a loss of some sort, a betrayal. This crisis eventually leads to a loss of meaning, where you can't find joy in the aspects of your life that used to fulfill you. This is different from a typical grieving process or a temporary experience of sadness. The dark night of the soul strikes something deeper and shakes the core of your existence. The dark night of the soul relates to a process of purification. You are being purified in the fire of darkness. The deep transformation that the dark night of the soul can offer is that it can liberate you from many of the false parts of yourself to live a more authentic life. You must lose the false self to find the true self. It can often take months or years for this process to complete itself. So it's about authenticity, and this is about having the courage to try to be as authentic as possible in any situation, and really not caring about the outcome, not being obsessed with the outcome and controlling the reaction of other people. Spiritual awakening journey is to help us through our process of metamorphosis. It's designed to help us shed our old identity and attachments, to break down all of the conditioning that we've received. And it's often accompanied by an internal monologue such as, there has to be more to life than this. Here's an interesting thing I found. We often fall into victim mentality during the dark night, and it takes radical self-responsibility to pull oneself out of the dark night. It isn't a process that can be rushed, so patience with yourself is key. During this process, you might often feel very alone, but you aren't alone. The other day, I opened up Google and typed in, what happens if you take a butterfly out of its cocoon early? And here was the answer. If you help a butterfly out of its cocoon, it will never fly. The struggle, wriggling of the cocoon is what fills its wings with blood. Without the blood filling, the wings won't spread, nor dry, and the half caterpillar with wet, undeveloped wings will be stuck in that moment in time and die. As I steer myself through a dark cloud of existential dread, I brace myself for the turbulence I cannot avoid any longer. No surface level, mundane activity seems to bring me joy anymore. It's exciting because I'm releasing attachments, but it's scary because I've defined my life through these attachments for years. Who am I? And what do I do now? This experience is unprecedented. There's no roadmap. Ascension is a solitary journey. We must stay humble as we journey through a vast expanse that we aren't meant to understand. And when the path gets exceptionally hard to walk, the most self-aware of us sometimes fall into the void, and the dark night begins. Life is a school, and the universe constantly sends us lessons. When they get very intense, they sometimes overwhelm us. That's because often the lesson we need to learn is to let go. If we hang on tightly, it becomes incredibly painful when we're forced to do so. The goal is to surrender the attachment and live in the present moment. We are shown repeatedly by the universe that we have very little control over our own lives. The goal of the discomfort is for us to shed attachments to expectations of outcomes, relationships, and material possessions. but the ego fights back hard. Nobody likes to be uncomfortable. But in the dark night of the soul, the pain is incredibly hard to embody. And yet I've learned that the fear and the pain are portals to a new state of consciousness. My salvation exists within the problem itself. That was an article written by Emily Jennings in the Medium website, which I will include in the show notes alongside some of the other articles that I've read from. So going back to St. John of the Cross, he writes, "If a man wishes to be sure of the road he's travelling on, he must close his eyes and travel in the dark." Traditionally, the dark night of the soul refers to the experience of losing touch with God, the Creator, and being plunged into the abyss of godless emptiness. And in an article that I will include entitled 7 Omens, you might be going through a dark night of the soul. Here we go. You feel a deep sense of sadness, which often verges on despair. This sadness is often triggered by the state of your own life, humanity, or the world as a whole. Number 2, you might feel an acute sense of unworthiness. You have the constant feeling of being lost or condemned to a life of suffering or emptiness. You possess a painful feeling of powerlessness and hopelessness. Number 5, your will and self-control is weakened, making it difficult for you to act. You lack interest and find no joy in things that once excited you. You crave for the loss of something intangible, a longing for a distant place or to return home again. This brings me to the term Hyreth, which is a Welsh word. And Hyreth is a spiritual longing for a home which maybe never existed. Nostalgia for ancient places which we cannot return to. The echo of lost places of our soul's past, or our grief for them. It's in the wind and the rocks and the waves. It's nowhere and everywhere at the same time. One of the questions that I was recently asked was, how is your shadow work going? Because one of my friends understands that I have been looking into the work of Carl Jung. And I think that what happens is we can actually get caught in a trap, a healing trap, where we actually spend too long in the darkness. It's important to go into the shadows, but it's important to come back and integrate that back into yourself and to not stay in the darkness. The healing trap is a battle between the inner child that needs unconditional acceptance and the ego's need for self-improvement. So you get stuck in this healing trap, which is a sense of confusion as to whether you're not doing enough or you're doing too much, and never really feeling happy and content with where you're at. I'm going to take this opportunity to read from a section of an article that was written in the New York Times by one of my favorite writers, Melissa Broder. And the article is entitled Life Without Longing. So I'm going to read a section from this now for you. Romantic obsession is my first language. I live in a world of fantasies, infatuations, and love poems. Sometimes I wonder if the yearnings I felt for others was more of a yearning for yearning itself. I've pined insatiably and repeatedly for strangers, new lovers, unrequited flames. While the subjects changed, the feeling remained. Perhaps then, I've not been so infatuated with the people themselves, but with the act of longing. It's so easy to confuse spiritual longing with a craving for romantic love. Beautiful people are everywhere, whereas the desire for some kind of eternal beauty or ineffable truth is more nebulous, always just out of reach. Recently, on a solo trip to Paris, I saw tangible beauty all over the city, in the twinkling of silver lights, the blackness of my coffee, the florid cemeteries hinting at a more immortal mortality. The beauty conjured feelings of deep rapture, but also a simultaneous ache of longing. I couldn't figure out why the beauty made me feel so sad. So, when will the dark night of the soul end then? The duration of the dark night of the soul varies significantly from person to person, and it can depend on various factors, including the individual's spiritual beliefs, practices, and the nature of their personal journey. There is no fixed timeline, but here are some factors influencing the duration. Each person's spiritual path is unique. The duration can be influenced by how deeply one engages with their spiritual practices. The dark night often requires a degree of surrender and acceptance of the process. Resisting the experience can prolong it, while embracing it can lead to a quicker resolution. Having a supportive spiritual community, mentors, and guides can help navigate this period more effectively. And the dark night is often a period of profound insight and transformation. It may, in fact, end when the individual has reached a new level of understanding or spiritual awakening. This also depends on psychological resilience, prior spiritual experiences, and personal circumstances play roles in how long the dark night lasts. But signs that the dark night is ending would be a renewed sense of purpose, a sense of inner peace, joy, and a connection to the divine or a higher power. Greater clarity about one's spiritual beliefs and understanding of life's meaning and purpose would be a sign that the dark night is ending. So, some advice on navigating through the dark night. I personally use journaling, and one of the most useful methods of journaling I've ever found is from the Crappy Childhood Fairy on YouTube, which I will include in the notes. And this is a process which involves writing down a list of fears and resentments, then a process which involves saying to your higher self or to God that you would like these fears and resentments taken away, and then you do a short meditation. I've done this a few times. It does work. There's many other forms of journaling, and I wrote a list of things down here. So if you are a person that prays, then I would recommend prayer. Somatic work is very important, and this is why exercise is so important as well. I lift at the gym and I go running. It's important to get out the emotions that we can often hold inside us, because the body holds these in. And if you've ever seen a dog after maybe just being in the water, or like after a traumatic event, they shake themselves because they are releasing the trauma that they've felt. This is why, say for example, a dog gets into a fight with another dog, you might see them shaking themselves afterwards to release the trauma that's just been built up. This is something that we can do to release trauma inside our bodies. A couple of other things I wrote down here. Screaming in the car, beating the bed with a baseball bat. So those are two things that I wrote down. I hope that somebody might find some kind of use in that, but that is just what I wrote down. Move your body. This is a note that I've written to myself. Move your body. You have to. You've gotten so fucking lazy. If you are interested in therapy, or you need therapy, I highly recommend therapy. But it's important to find somebody that you resonate with and somebody that you feel comfortable divulging everything to. And I would say, I would just say that word everything, because what's the point in doing therapy if you're not going to be honest with the therapist? So if you're looking for a therapist, tell them what the problem is. Use the word spiritual. Use the word spiritual crisis. Say you're having a spiritual crisis or a spiritual emergency. That's just my advice, because then you will possibly or probably be connected with somebody that speaks the same language as you. If I was to go to the doctor, or I was to go to a therapist and use the word spiritual emergency or spiritual crisis, and they didn't really understand what I was talking about, or they didn't want to use that kind of language, then that's not the person that I would go with. For me, this sterile psychologist kind of environment is not the way that I like to deal with things. I find peace and comfort in various different spiritual practices that I've talked about today. So that's just my advice there. If a spiritual practice isn't working for you, then it's important to try something different. If you think of yourself as a religious person and you find comfort in the church, then that's a brilliant thing. I personally don't. I've never felt really comfortable in that kind of environment. If you find comfort in the tarot, or if you find comfort in reading spiritual literature, or looking at various different spiritual practices online, this could be practices that are seen more as new age. It's what resonates with you. Don't let anybody tell you that what you're doing is wrong, or that their practice is superior to anything that you think that you want to try. So that's been my exploration and my conversation about the dark night of the soul. And I understand that everybody's experience is going to be different. Some people may never experience this. And some people may experience this earlier on in life or much later on in life. It can happen at any time. Something or somebody will come along to change your world. And I'm going to end this off today with a quote from Anis Nin. You live like this, sheltered in a delicate world, and you believe that you're living. Then you read a book, or you take a trip, and you discover that you're not living. You're actually hibernating. The symptoms of hibernating are easily detectable. First, restlessness. The second symptom, when hibernating, becomes dangerous and might degenerate into death, and that's the absence of pleasure. That's all. It appears like an innocuous illness. Monotony, boredom, death. Millions live like this and die like this without even knowing it. They work in offices. They drive a car. They picnic with their families. They raise children. And then some shock treatment takes place. A person, a book, a song, and it awakens them and saves them from death. Some never awaken. And that's all I've got for you today. So if you've enjoyed the show, thank you for listening, and please rate the show, follow me, and follow my Instagram, Ascending the Abyss, and that will all be included in the show notes. And until next time.